Hello. Most people think Christmas has been an annual ritual celebration of Jesus' birth since the time Christianity started, and the day he was born was chosen by the church to help spread Christianity and to use Christmas to replace pagan celebrations that were traditionally held on this day. Well, my answer to you is no, it wasn't. And in fact, Christians used to say anyone celebrating Christmas would be cursed. So in this video I'm going to explain why. So welcome to the story of why Christmas is when it is, and welcome to Cleckenfold. Let me start by first giving a history of where the need for Christmas comes from. Once Jesus was born, no one at all, gave a single shred of consideration as to the date of Jesus' birthday until around 200 years after his alleged birth. And why is this? Well, people of the Near East, Mediterranean and Europe just didn't celebrate birthdays at this time, certainly not like we do today. They were interested in when you came of age, so when you could be married or have children or go to war. But other birthdays didn't mean much, and if you really think about it, they don't really mean much. I mean, in the grand scheme of life, what does your birthday mean apart from you're a year older and reminding you that you should be living life? So birthdays weren't seen as important at this time. And there's proof of this, and it comes from the first reference we find of Jesus' birth. And this can be found in the writings of Clement of Alexandria, dated to around 194 CE, and he wrote a series of books called the Stomata. And in book 1 he says, "And there are those who have determined not only the year of our Lord's birth, but also the day. And they say that it took place in the 28th year of Augustus and in the 25th day of Pagan." Based on the Gregorian calendar, with the calendar we use today, the 25th day of Pagan is dated to May the 20th, and the 28th year of Augustus is 2 BCE. And then Clement then writes elsewhere in the Stromata that other thinkers think Jesus was born on the 21st of March, and the 15th of April, and the 20th of April, and the 21st of April. But you get the idea. Almost all the dates that were chosen were in the first half of the year, and most were around spring, when Christians now celebrate Easter. And this crucifixion time, that's what Easter celebrates, when Jesus was crucified, is a copy of the 30 or so other crucifixion stories that happened before Jesus and have been written in history. And there, if you want to read more of those, they're in that video there. So what we have is Clement was expressing wonderment why people would even consider when Jesus was born. And it is known at this time that anyone who publicised such thoughts would get opposition from Christians. I mean, they didn't see Jesus' birthday as important. I mean, if it was, it would have been mentioned in the Gospels, right? You know, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John all said nothing about the birthday, and 2 of them didn't even mention the birth at all. In fact, the whole Bible doesn't mention Jesus' birthday. Which brings us to the mention of the birth we have. That is from a chap called Origen, and he was an early Christian scholar in about 245 CE, and so he was writing 50 years later than Clement, and he wrote something called a homily. And in his 8th homily on Leviticus, and the homily being a long droning lecture, he said of trying to work out Jesus' birth date, and this can be found in part 3 section 2 of this homily: "Not one from all the saints is found to have celebrated a festive day or a great feast on the day of his birth. No one is found to have had joy on the day of the birth of his son or daughter. Only sinners rejoice over this kind of birthday." And then he goes on to say, "We find in the Old Testament Pharaoh, king of Egypt, celebrating the day of his birth with a festival, and in the New Testament Herod. However, both of them stained the festival of their birth by shedding blood." And then from here, he then reaches a conclusion. "But the saints not only do not celebrate a festival on their birthdays, but, filled with the Holy Spirit, they curse that day. And so, by the middle of the 3rd century, celebrating the baby Jesus' birthday would lead you to be cursed, and celebrating your own birthday would lead you to be cursed." So, what's going on? why are we now today in a quite different position? Well, against earlier advice from scholars, some people did try to work out when Jesus was born by using clues in the New Testament of the Bible. That book being one of the most unauthentic and unreliable books in history that some people take as fact and historical. And if you want to know why it's unauthentic and unreliable, then have a look at this video, which is an interview with Richard Carrier, which will just rip it apart. Now, the clues people follow in the New Testament are that Mary and Joseph were attending a public census, and that would only happen in the summer. And if shepherds were watching their flocks, then that would only happen in the spring. And so Jesus must have been born in the spring or summer, which doesn't really narrow it down much. But there is a more complex calculation around something known as the division of Abijah. And that is the working out when a certain priest who worked in a certain temple, who met John the Baptist's mother, when that happened, John the Baptist's mother was pregnant, and as John was born 6 months before Jesus, you can try and work out when Jesus was born, and that gives a birth date of September, so the start of autumn and not spring or summer. And so looking at all the information, what we have here is basically a Jesus born on all sorts of dates that weren't December the 25th. In fact, none of them were December, but on which mainstream Christians really care about nowadays. But back then, they didn't care about it. They didn't care about a special day, and they would be cursed if they did. Now, something Origen also mentions is that followers of a Gnostic teacher from Alexandria, Basilides, he taught about the baptism of Christ happening on the 11th or 15th of the month of Tubi, and that corresponds with January the 6th or 10th in the Gregorian calendar today. And this is the first mention of what the Church now calls the Epiphany, on the 6th of January, the time when Christ is baptized. And this raises an important point about why the 25th of December wasn't chosen deliberately as Christmas Day. You see, one of the arguments about why the 25th of December was chosen for Christmas was to help counter paganism. But it doesn't consider the fact that many countries to the east of Rome, or those based with an orthodox type of Christianity, celebrate Christmas on the 6th of January. So think about that. And remember it, half of Christians at the end of the first millennium were celebrating Christmas on the 6th of January, not the 25th of December. And so if the church was looking to make the 25th of December a day to celebrate the birth of Jesus, they forgot to tell an awful lot of people. So when was the 25th of December chosen, and why? Well, again, against the earlier advice of don't try and work out the date of birth, the birth date of Jesus was assigned in the 4th century, probably by Pope Julius I, and he served between 337 and 352 CE. And it was written in the 7th century by John of Nicaea, a chronicler, that Cyril of Jerusalem asked Pope Julius I to assign the true date of the Nativity from census documents brought by Titus to Rome, and Titus served about 35, well, he was alive from 35 to about 90 CE. But in those census documents, no one has seen them since, and they're never mentioned again. But looking at those, it says that Julius, the Pope, assigns the 25th of December. So by 352, the Pope of the Roman Catholic Church has said Jesus was born on the 25th of December, and within a couple of years, and we know this from a document known as the Chronography 354, written in 354 CE, we have a number of pieces of documentation in effect reinforcing that, because that document contains the earliest calendar that references Christ's birthday as a celebration. It has a list called the Commemoration of Martyrs, of which Jesus is first listed, and next to him, translated from Latin, are the words, on the 8th day before calends of January, Christ was born in Bethlehem of Judea. And there's also a list of consuls going all the way up to 354 CE, and in there it says that Christ was born on 1 AD, and during the reign of Augustus Caesar and Paulus. And so all this meant that by the second half of the 4th century, the Nativity was widely recognised by the Catholic Church and Christians that followed it to have occurred on December the 25th. And this belief then reached Constantinople, the heart of the Eastern Empire, where more orthodox Christianity occurred, around the end of the 4th century. So now we know that the 25th of December was written into history in the Catholic Church by the year 400 CE. Why was that date chosen, considering everything that has been told up to now saying it wasn't that date? And to help understand this and the pagans' perspective, let's talk about what the pagans were doing at this time. And the Roman ones were celebrating Saturnalia, a feast that started around the 17th of December and lasted up to a week, depending on where you lived and what year you were living in history, as festivals change over time, much like they do today. And Saturnalia was being celebrated from about 200 BCE all the way through to 200 CE, so over 400 years of tradition. And the festival itself finished before the 25th of December. In the longest cases of the festival, it lasted until the 24th. So Christmas just wasn't replacing that. There's just no way the church could erase 400 years of tradition overnight, and let alone with a festival that took place after that festival ended. And there's no way the church could influence everybody across Europe who was celebrating it, especially those Christians who thought that Christmas was on the 6th of January. But in 274 CE, Emperor Aurelian declared that December the 25th be the feast day for the birth of Sol Invictus, a powerful sun god, a festival so popular that even Christians took part in the celebration. And again, even with this festival, the church wouldn't have been powerful enough to command a change across the whole of Europe to celebrate the birth of Jesus instead. The church just didn't command power outside of its locale. Bishops couldn't influence, certainly outside the cities in the country where there were no churches. It just wasn't able to do that. The church just couldn't influence people in those lands. It just didn't have the power, it didn't have the money, it didn't have the influence, not at that point in time. And how could it change everybody who was thinking that January the 6th was Christmas? The power was held by the landowners. They decided when their subjects could take days off. They decided if a church could build property on their land. The church could only respond to the populace of the majority. So what happened? Well, something far less exciting. And we need to go back to 200 CE and to Tertullian of Carthage that said that the 14th of Nisan was the day of the crucifixion according to the Gospel of St. John. And that was calculated to be March the 25th. And it is this idea that was reproduced in a document called the Christian Treatise, called On Solstices and Equinoxes, dated to the 4th century, around the time Julius, the Pope in Rome, was declaring when it was Christmas. And this document stated that the Lord was conceived on the 8th of the calends of April in the month of March, which is the day of the Passion and the Conception. So what's going on here is that the church is saying the day Jesus was conceived was the day he died. And the discrepancy of dates from the 25th of December to the 6th of January is not to do with translating the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar, as often is popularised. It's to do with the Jewish calendar having lunar months, and the lunar month of Nisan, which floats around a bit, matches the Gregorian time of between March and April. So depending when you thought the lunar month was, or depending where you thought Jesus' crucifixion was, and therefore his conception. So whilst people were arguing when Jesus was born, some worked out when Jesus has died, which was either March the 25th or April the 6th. And because of that being the day he was conceived, or as the treatise says, for on that day he was conceived, on the same he suffered, we then can say that 9 months after he was conceived, he was born. And 9 months after March the 25th is December the 25th. The date that was then selected by Pope Julius I. And this was further ratified by a book on the Trinity by St. Augustine in Book 4, Section 9. He wrote around 415 CE that for he is believed to have been conceived on the 25th of March, upon which day he also suffered. Considering all of this, considering half the population of the Roman Empire celebrated Christmas on the 6th of January, and not everyone celebrated Sol Invictus, but those who did were both Christian and non-Christian, and that there's been no records whatsoever, none, about the pagan festivals of Saturnalia or Sol Invictus being absorbed by the Christian festival of Christmas, then all we are left with is that over time, as Christianity grew more popular, so did the once unimportant Christmas, and the celebration of pagan festivals declined organically. But we can turn the argument on its head a bit and ask why some people think Christianity tried to replace pagan holidays. And the first we see of this is in the 12th century with Dionysus. He is a Syriac biblical scholar, and he stated that in ancient times the Christmas holiday was moved to the 25th of December from the 6th of January, so it fell on the same date as Sol Invictus. And come the 18th and 19th centuries, when comparative religious studies started being taken more seriously, this idea was then picked up by scholars who claimed that early Christians didn't know when Jesus was born. They simply assimilated the pagan festivals for their own purpose. They could claim it as the Messiah's birthday and celebrated it accordingly. Christmas, though, was just an unimportant date that turned into an important date, and then a ritual that grew into a festival over hundreds of years. And that grew as Christianity grew. There was no master plan trying to erase the pagan festivals across Europe. It just wasn't possible. But one thing is for sure, the first Christians didn't care when Jesus was born, not within the first 200 years of his death. So why do they now? Well, to me, if you want to be kind and generous, you don't wait for one day of the year when you're told to be, especially by an organisation that can be seen as corrupt by some, and at a time of year that is so commercialised. Be kind and be generous all the time. And so, on that note, I hope you celebrate the winter solstice and the sun gods with the reverence they deserve. And remember, if you celebrate Christmas, be prepared to be cursed by Christian fundamentalists. Stay safe, take care, and this was Craig and Ford.